of the little life, Sri Aurobindo is taking us, or rather making us confront with a difficult side of human nature. In fact, it is not human nature but terrestrial nature. This is the beauty when we read these. These are planes of consciousness, universal planes of consciousness. They are not individual to us. It is part of Earth's inheritance. And as Earthlings, and as born on Earth, we inherit it. Just as when a child is born to a parent, he inherits not only the good things, but as the mother puts it, also the atavistic tendencies. So we have inherited this as part of our terrestrial nature. This is not to say that this is the only thing in human nature. Sri Aurobindo would show us the peaks towards which human nature rises. It can climb in some lonely hours, and the ultimate towards which it is inevitably moving. But it's important to know this side of human nature for various practical reasons. From one point of view, it shows us that it is not an individual or a few human beings who have this difficult side. It is universal. In some it is hidden, in some it is revealed, in some it wears a certain mask, in someone else another mask. In fact, much of what we call as humanness is composed of this. We just read the little friendships, the little joys, the little sorrows, the little amusements, the trivial plot, the little drama, the small successes, and the fortunate failures of life. This is the plot. As he has said, the plot, even in man, the plot is poor and weak. So this is a terrestrial nature. It's there in everyone. It takes different shapes and forms. We are moved by beings and forces and agencies of which we are not aware. This is one of the forms of ignorance with which we suffer. In spiritual life, ignorance is not just book knowledge. One may know everything of what is written in a book and yet remain ignorant of these deeper forces, these hidden springs of action and life, these unwise prompters of speech and thought and act. These agencies, unseen agencies, whisper in our ears unwise messages. They compel our heartstrings to follow a misleading call. They enter into our being and pervert the will and distort it, and we are impelled to do things which we are not. Sometimes we discover it after much has passed, and when we look back, especially if by the divine grace we come out of this world, then we look at ourselves and wonder how foolish we have been, and we thought we were very wise. So he is confronting us with this side of human nature. It's universal. Second, this is to make us vigilant, so that we can become vigilant. Often any suggestion, any whisper, any feeling, any impulse, when it enters the domain of our personal consciousness, we regard it as myself. This is habitual. The ego does it automatically. Anything that arises within it thinks as itself, and without the least discrimination, it acts under it. Almost all of us at some point of time succumb to these things. A very common, simple example can be, we are sitting at the ashram and suddenly, we get a suggestion, oh, let's go. Now, we don't even care where this suggestion is coming from. Simple suggestion, let's not go there. And we just go by that wave. These are waves of suggestion which come from these worlds. There are so many instances in context of the ashram where Sri Aurobindo and the mother have written letters that this suggestion to go away is a hostile suggestion, and people would think this is my own suggestion and this is true because this is coming inside me. Because this part one has to confront. Normally in human life, this part is covered with the neat layers of moral and mental control. They don't change anything. What is known as moral control is simply letting the poison circulate within limits. Thus, anger, greed, lust are all right so long as we do it within the social norms and the moral limits which a certain society or a custom or culture imposes upon us. But it is a poison nevertheless. If one is angry with one's child, it's all right. It's not regarded as an immoral act. But we have just seen that all anger, fear, if one is afraid of the swine flu virus, it is supposed to be even good. But when we look at from this point of view, we see that all these forces, how they work and how they really take hold of the human consciousness and perpetuate their task. So it gives us a vantage point so that we can be more vigilant and learn to discriminate in what is coming from the fallen and low worlds, as it is called in the mystic literature. In fact, in the Indian thought, there are 7 heavens above and 7 types of patala. Their names are also there. The underbelly of terrestrial nature. Sri Aurobindo will also tell us the different layers. He'll go to the right, the roots from which this lower vital world is sustained. Maybe next time, not this time, but next year we will be doing that. That from where are the roots of this lower vital sustained? What is nourishing it? What is supporting these beings? What has distorted the will to be, the ananda of existence, and given the Lord of life this distorted and tortuous mask? The third practical implication is that at some point of time or the other, in one's inner life, one has to tackle this part. Not only when one is ascending, then it is enough to little bit modify it perhaps, but when the transforming power touches this part of nature, which Sri Aurobindo describes so beautifully as against all higher light, its tough rebels. One has to tackle it. Sri Aurobindo says in one of his letters, the failure or success of this yoga depends on this crucial and decisive movement. Whether one goes through this quagmire, this marshy land of lower vital or not. Many a boats of spiritual life sink in that mire. Many are caught helplessly, seeking for rescue out of this world, because it's this nature, this part of human nature or terrestrial nature has such a strong hold on matter. Knowing this, Mother was working for decades on the very cells, not just of her body, but the cells of human consciousness, to free them of this dirt. And this is what is meant in the true sense, that you must keep the temple clean if you wish to install there the living presence. And that's where Sri Aurobindo brings a beautiful image. Well, not so beautiful image, but an image in terms of its revelatory power, that we can have very beautiful houses, but there is another house in which we all live, the psychological house. And he has painted that picture that how many of us live in houses which are dim lit, very small, teeming with these agencies. If we were to look at the floor of our psychological house, it's full of this lower vital agency. Of course, we are very good at putting nice carpets, and especially when people come, we like to put nice carpets. Sometimes even clean it and put it in a corner. But when one takes to inner life, this part bursts open and one has to confront it. And that's why Sri Aurobindo insists so much on laying a solid foundation of yoga, peace, equanimity, trust. Otherwise, when one confronts this part, it's very difficult to go through, almost impossible, because it can be so suffocating. So this is what is meant when it is said, Mother's victory in us. These are the truths he is making us confront. And we read quite a few passages. And we'll just complete this passage which we half read. On page 164, trivial amusements stimulate and waste. Page 164, line 486. The energy given to him to grow and be, his little hour is spent in little things. A brief companionship with many jars, a little love and jealousy and hate. This is the human life, the melodrama of human life, which we so much are attracted to. A touch of friendship mid indifferent crowds. Draw his heart plan on life's diminutive map. The range of a life is small. And within that, we think we are kings. Like in a bubble case, one sees one's own reflection. If something great awakes, too frail his pitch to reveal its zenith tension of delight, his thought to eternize its ephemeral soar. Art's brilliant gleam is a pastime for his eyes. This is exactly the description of our present world, where spirituality is regarded as a thing of retired life and art is a pastime. Don't talk of all these things, painting, poetry. What is their use after all? One must do something which fetches money so that you can have a good job. Delight, beauty, these things are simply pastimes. And spiritual effort is supposed to be an effort when the heart has got tired and the senses have got completely exhausted of everything. That is the time one is supposed to be fit for spiritual life. And so beautifully, when someone wrote a letter to Sri Aurobindo that now I have retired, all my responsibilities are over, I want to come and settle in the ashram, applies for it. Sri Aurobindo replies back with his characteristic humor, now is the time to apply to the graveyard. It's not the time, because we can see this is the battle of spiritual life. It's not an easy life at all. Please, no, I mean all of us of course here know it very well. It's not something coming to an ashram is, wow, what a pleasant, beautiful, all responsibilities are over, all difficulties. This is the difficulty one has to tackle in inner life, which is sometimes far more difficult than tackling an outer problem, because this is within us. A thrill that smites the nerves is music's spell. And we can go down a few lines, 507. All dulls down to convention and routine. This world makes everything, that subconscious automaton. We read of the first impulse of life is subconscious, subservient to matter. And very soon even spiritual effort becomes a routine. As the mother says, some people even do meditation as if they are they are doing some favor to God. Even meditation becomes a ritual and a routine. There is no joy in it, no seeking, no aspiration. One must sit in a fixed posture at a fixed time with eyes closed, bolt straight, and that is enough. And after 20 minutes, one sees the time, yes, my quota is over. It's universal. So Sri Aurobindo is telling us, all dulls down to convention and routine. The joy passes away. And that is why in the Mother Sri Aurobindo says, your surrender must be living and glad and free, not the submission of an automaton. This is the automaton who does everything as a dull convention. Or a fierce excitement brings him vivid joys. His days are tinged with the red hue of strife, and lust's hot glare, and passion's crimson stain. Passion's crimson stain, battle and murder are his tribal game. Time has he none to turn his eyes within and look for his lost self and his dead soul. Of course, the soul can never die, but this is what Sri Aurobindo is saying. Soul which has receded so far into the background. To us, it is as if dead. We are so alive to the body and so dead to the soul. His motion on two short and axis wheels. There was a time, not far back, when if you stepped out of your village, it was a big thing. Two short and axis wheels. In fact, many times people felt that you have become an outcast, you have gone away. You should be in the village, do everything only for the village. Of course, the motion moves very far. But even physically, this was true. The little conventions, the little customs, one had to be a slave to them. If one broke free from anything, one was absolutely an outcast. He cannot soar but creeps on his long road, or if impatient of the trudge of time, he would make a splendid haste on times, on fate's slow road. His heart that runs soon pants and tires and sinks. So one starts spiritual life with great enthusiasm. Oh, new world, supramental, psychic being, very nice. One starts. After a few months, one has some nice little experiences. After 1 year, oh, every day I have to do this, the same work, I have to meet the same boss every day. Oh, what is this life? Slowly, 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 the heart begins to tire and pant and sink. After 5 years, one becomes the same old person that one was. Mother describes it in very, very beautiful an advice to newcomers. It is on page 47, Collected Works of Mother, volume 12. No, it's not because of exceptional memory, because I have several times read this passage to remind myself. It's an advice given by the mother to newcomers. And in PED, very beautifully, it is available as a small little passage, where she says, when people come here, they come with their psychic being in front. So everything looks good. The food they eat, the people they meet, the event circumstances, in everything they feel grace. Sometimes you breathe and feel it's grace. And it's so beautiful. And then she says, this brings in them its effects because of the psychic emergence. She says it's because of the psychic touch. And what are the effects? It brings peace and goodwill in the heart, wideness and light in the mind and understanding, health and fitness in the physical. She also says it brings all these. But then she says, after a while, the old nature comes back. And what does it do? Everything we find fault with. The food is not good. Dining room food remains unchanged. Very boring. The people become very bad. The same people who were great sadhaks begin to appear as horrible human beings. And in everything we begin to see fault, fault, fault. And then she says, taking cue from Sri Aurobindo's writings, we begin to even indulge in everything for the body and forgetting all about the soul, saying that after all life is yoga. We must take care of our physical needs. So mother says, what is the remedy for this state of affairs? Here also we see the same remedy. This is the state till human animal is Lord. She says it's because the old nature comes back. And Sri Aurobindo tells us, till he has found his soul and his spirit is free. This is the remedy. And so, the mother says, what is the remedy for this state of affairs? She says, go straight for your psychic being. Find your soul. When we come, it is the first touch. So, this comes out by the shock of the outer, which it has never breathed and experienced. But after some time, it retires and the old nature comes back. So the only remedy for this state of affairs is to press inward rather than outward and to find the hidden soul. So Sri Aurobindo is telling us here in one line this deep truth. His heart that runs soon pants and tires and sinks. After 10 years, we forget all about inner life and we say, fine, this fine, let it continue as it is. So it tires and pants. Or he walks ever on and finds no end because it's moving in round and round in the same circle. I think I have narrated this story in Delhi. I used to take a walk outside my quarters, living quarters in Subrata Park. So I had a fixed round like the Kolu ka bell. So as I would go out on a road, I will see written there Amritsar 440 kilometers. So I'll walk about 1 kilometer. When I am back to the place, I am again seeing Amritsar 440 kilometers. So I used to remind myself, this is how we walk in inner life. that we remain the same distance even though we seem to be walking. Because we walk around the little circle of the ego, around the little life, its little interest, little desires. Therefore, we move ever on and find nothing. Hardly a few can climb to greater life. All tunes to a low scale and conscious pitch. His knowledge dwells in the house of ignorance. What a marvelous line this is. In the Gita, Sri Krishna speaks of knowledge and ignorance. It's a very ancient Indian division. And by that, if we take that yardstick and standard, all that we know within the domain of mind by the power of the mind is ignorance. It may look knowledge to the eyes of, that look, there is this virus which is causing this flu. I'm sorry, and of course, boss is sitting there, so I should be a little more careful. But all kinds of, knowledge that we claim to be knowledge are nothing but ignorance. All these sciences, all the arts, all the philosophies that our mind has created is ignorance. This is the broad distinction. So even our knowledge is bound in the heart, in the house of ignorance. And it's only when we break free from the borders of the mind and emerge in a higher consciousness, only when we breathe a freer and vaster air, a more luminous sight informs our heart and brain, that we can say that we have begun to have glimpses of knowledge. Only glimpses, because the Vedic rishis speak of several dawns. One glimpse, then another glimpse, then third glimpse, and infinite glimpses. Then one day dawns the spiritual day. So Sri Aurobindo is telling us that his knowledge dwells in the house of ignorance. His force nears not even once the omnipotent. Rare are his visits of heavenly ecstasy, the bliss which sleeps in things and tries to wake, because this is the condition. In one of his aphorisms, Sri Aurobindo says that one must pass beyond enjoyings, beyond pleasure, to have delight. This is the condition. Still, delight sometimes breaks through in spite of all this, and that is the divine grace. In fact, if one reads this mad world of disorder, these so many forms and forces, one wonders that why is it that we don't fall sick more often? That's why they say that go to any country, but if you come to India, you will have faith in grace. If you can walk through, the crisscrossing things all around Pondicherry and Calcutta and Mumbai, and without breaking a bone for days after days and months after months, surely it is an act of grace. Simply by faith. Cyclist and car and bullock cart and everything moves like this. By what law one doesn't know. In fact, there is no law. So if you try to go by the traffic law, you are likely to meet an accident. So it is by the grace that one lives. If one really looks at this chaos, this scanty grace is his persistent stay. It lightens the burden of his many ills and reconciles him to his futile world, the little joys of life. After which we say, it was okay, life is not bad enough. He is satisfied with his common average kind. We remember those lines from Savitri where Sri Aurobindo says, he falls back to the mud from which he climbed. The human average is his level pitch. To think as others think, that is what we feel is the highest. He is satisfied with his common average kind, tomorrow's hopes, and his old rounds of thought, his old familiar interests and desires. He has made into a thick and narrowing hedge. God wants to come inside. So we defend ourselves from his entry. We say God should come, God should come. But we have built a thick hedge. So he tries to see, where are you? We can't even hear. Why? Because old familiar interests and desires he must cross or smash. So sometime when he is very kind, he smashes them because he can do it. Then we complain, oh, you are so cruel, you broke my fence. Who asked you to do this? So we put difficult conditions for the divine, that he must enter through a small door, narrow passage, through the back door, without disturbing the hedge of desires and interest. Of course, he fulfills that condition also sometimes. But can we imagine what conditions we put for him? Defending his small life from the invisible. This is our defense. In Savitri, we have a line that when the divine comes, how do human beings react? He says, his thorns of fallen nature are the defense against the savior light. Thorns of fallen nature. The divine wants to step inside our house, and instead of cleaning the house, we lay thorns to walk in. Once Sri Aurobindo was asked this question, why should the divine need to drink filtered water? He is divine after all. So Sri Aurobindo says, but why the deuce would you want to give the divine water full of germs and bacteria? He does not say, but this is the truth, that it is not a question of water full of germs and bacteria, it is a water full of ill will. If we look at it from this point of view, it is full of ill will, teeming with these wills. Of course, the divine can digest, but that's not good from our part. That because he is divine, I can throw mud at him. How does it matter? So Sri Aurobindo is telling us, how do we greet the divine? When divine comes to us, first we ask 100 questions. Are you the divine? Where do you come from? Show me your identity card. What powers you have? What can you give me? And after he satisfied all conditions, we put a final test. I lay a bed of thorns. Walk on this and show me that you are divine. Does it hurt you or not? This is human nature. This is a very touching line from Tulsidas. Ram Swami Kusevak Moso Deki Kripanidhi Kehi Vidhiposo. That there is the true master, savior like Rama, and Kusevak like me, such an idiotic servant like me. It is only because of your grace that you are tolerating me. Otherwise, there is nothing in me worthy of, because this is how we greet the divine. He has shut away from him into inmost self, fenced off the greatnesses of hidden God. We are most scared, so even now the concept is the best room, living room, which is for others, that is well looked after. Then our bedroom also should be good. Kitchen, of course, must be good. But God's place must be in a small little cupboard. We open for 5 minutes and show a little agarbatti. We have done our duty. Then we shut him off, because if he starts coming with us to office and other places, it will be a difficulty. Sometimes we put photos, of course, but we don't want to listen to him. We want to do our way. So Sri Aurobindo is telling us, he has shut away from him into inmost self, fenced off the greatnesses of hidden God. His being was formed to play a trivial part. We are comfortable with that. In a little drama on a petty stage, in a narrow plot, he has pitched his tent of life. Beneath the wide gaze of the starry vast. That is frightening. To sleep in the open, beneath the starry vast. That is frightening. So we like to have a little cozy place to ourselves. And they who live so vast in the consciousness, we have big houses and small consciousness. And in contrast, we have, of course, the supreme example, the Divine Mother, who for decades of staying here did not even have a proper room to herself. And in 1954, when she has a place built for herself, even there was no privacy. If she had to talk to someone, one had to pull the old refrigerator to create some privacy. And when she was asked that, why don't we construct a room for you? She says, but my child, where is the money? This is the way the divine acts. And finally, when a room is made, we see how small, it's by all standards a small room, if we take today's standards. And yet, who dwelled in it or dwells in it? The infinite, the vast, the unique, the alone. unlike us. So here he's giving us a picture. He is the crown of all that has been done. This is now touch of satire, gentle satire. He is the crown of all that has been done. Thus is creation's labor justified. This is the world's result, nature's last poise. All those who believe human beings are the best and the highest, Sri Aurobindo is telling, is this the crown? No wonder. I am sure Buddha saw this, the great sages saw this, and seeing this human nature, they said, this cannot be changed, there is no hope. They saw this and declared the world is truly must be an accident, an illusion. How could this creature, this small creature, low-pitched tent, dwelling in such a squalor, flat, mud-built house of his inner life, how could he be God's creation? This kind of nature? And so they declared in their haste that there is no remedy for earth. All that human beings can do is to break this house and enter into the ineffable nirvana. And this is understandable if this is all. So Sri Aurobindo is telling us, in fact we see that in the Buddha's vision, this world is created by desire, because Buddha saw this world very concretely. But there is something he did not see. That Sri Aurobindo will give us the complete picture. He saw this is a world of desire, small desires, greed, hope, lust, little joys, little sorrow. And if this were all and nothing more were meant, if what now seems were the whole of what must be, if this were not a state through which we pass on our road from matter to eternal self, to the light that made the worlds the cause of things, well might interpret our mind's limited view. If this is not a stage but the end result of nature, then our mind's limited view would interpret existence as an accident in time. Doesn't matter whether we call it a spiritual accident or a chemical accident. It amounts to the same. Leave it and quit. The language differs. Existence as an accident in time, illusion or phenomenon or freak, the paradox of a creative thought which moves between unreal opposites. Unreal opposites. When you go to that plane, this appears unreal. How could it be? When you live here, that appears unreal. Both are to each other mutually unreal. Sri Aurobindo describes this state also when he is seen from the highest point in the house of the spirit and the new creation. It's saying if when we look at it, they seem to move between unreal opposites. When we have the experience of the Satchidananda inside, then this appears like a dream, a nightmare, not even a dream. Dream is a very nice word. Nightmare of the soul, as that's how some mystics call it. When we come here, then we begin to wonder, was that experience real? Did I truly experience it? Was that delight true? Was that light real? Because to this, that appears unreal. When we are in that, this dissolves and vanishes. Where is its existence? It is nothing but cinematic images. So Sri Aurobindo is telling us, there is a stage of consciousness when we have a limited view, but some experience which moves between unreal opposites, inanimate force struggling to feel and know, matter that chance to read itself by mind, in conscience, monstrously engendering soul. This is what scientists say. Oh, there is no soul and all. Some crazy people live in Pondicherry and here and there, and they talk of soul. Don't be deluded by them. Soul is nothing but secretion of pineal gland and the thymus gland. This is, by the way, a very old discredited theory. And Sri Aurobindo, of course, discredited long back, but still there are books which are written that soul, yes, soul is true because this is a pineal gland secretion. If this was soul, it is not worth the effort. The mother says very clearly, soul is in the fourth dimension. It houses itself in matter, it penetrates matter and informs it. Agnir yathaiko bhuvanam pravishto rupam rupam pratirupo babhuva. Vayur yathaiko bhuvanam pravishto. But it's not that, it is something else than that. But the scientific limited view will tell us, no, soul is nothing but creation of inconscience. Just like mechanically mind is born, mechanically soul is born, and people give it big names. So all these mystics who had these experiences are basically schizophrenics. So here Sri Aurobindo is telling us this limited view will tell us inconscience monstrously engendering soul. It is an ignorant view, of course. At times all looks unreal and remote. We seem to live in a fiction of our thoughts. And this is what is the beauty and compassion of Sri Aurobindo. Mystics who saw it withdrew from life. It is so difficult to live with this. And Sri Aurobindo, who saw it, came and gave hope to this life. This is the great sacrifice for which no gratitude is enough. We see this inscription on the Samadhi: to thee who has suffered, struggled, hoped, achieved all for us. Prepared, achieved all for us. A few lines below, in a false perspective of effect and cause. When we look at this world, all our idea of effect and cause, if you do this, this happens, if you do this, that happens, this is all an ignorant view. It looks real at this point of time, but we know how this knowledge is replaced over periods of time. People believed one day that stars cause illness and health, and they were right in that age and it helped. Today they believe it's not the stars but something else, and we believe in it and it helps. But both are limited and ignorant view of life. There is something else, and that's what Sri Aurobindo has revealed to us. The spirits of disorder, doubt, the spirits of confusion, the genie of diseases, these are the ones who bring confusion and disorder in human life. In a false perspective of effect and cause, trusting to a spacious prospect of world space, in drifts incessantly from scene to scene, whither it knows not to what fabulous verge all here is dreamed or doubtfully exist. But who the dreamer is and whence he looks is still unknown, or only a shadowy guess. Or the world is real. Now Sri Aurobindo gives us another possibility for the human mind. Why do you say the world is unreal? Why don't you say that world is real and we are small for the stage? So this may be well an escape, to escape from grappling with the world forces. And it is true, many illusionists are basically escapists. They cannot handle the immensity of the world. So out of fear they turn away. That's why Mother says that it is not enough to come for this yoga out of disgust of the world. One cannot face the trials of yoga if one has not faced the trials of real life. It is not out of disgust of life that one should turn to yoga. Or the world is real, but ourselves too small. Disgust from life, inability to meet it, means that something in us is small and incapable, insufficient for the mightiness of our stage. And then we can go down a few lines. 585. This is the sign of matter's infinite. He's explained this whole world built upon matter's blocks, still governed by matter, ruled by matter, lived by matter, and absorbed back into matter. This is the sign of matter's infinite. This the weird purport of the pictures shown. To science the giantess, measurer of her field, as she pores on the record of her close survey and mathematizes her huge external world. To reason, bound within the circle of sense. What is science? Based on sensory evidence. It is something so simple, and it's amazing that scientists fail to see it. That the whole basis of science is based on three presumptions. One, matter is the sole reality. So material evidence is the only evidence. Second, the data of the senses is the only evidence. And third, reason is the only instrument of knowledge. All science is based on this, and therefore all science is foredoomed eventually to failure. It cannot arrive at the ultimate knowledge. Because one, its instruments deceive. We are just shown that senses are not the only instrument. Very often they only screen things. Senses are misguided by appearances. Anybody can fool us by charming appearances, because we are fooled by appearances. It's a science of appearances. Mother says in her Thoughts of Aphorisms, when she gives a commentary of Sri Aurobindo's Thoughts and Aphorism, she says what we call as our science is actually a science of appearances. It sees either with the sense or augmented sense. Microscope and telescope is nothing but augmentation of sense. And it's a science of appearances. So, senses. Second, reason is the only way to decide. But yoga tells us that there are ranges of consciousness asleep within us. Intuition, inspiration, spontaneous psychic discrimination, and rivers of knowledge which can pour and inform our heart and brain. We see this beautiful result. So these are asleep in us and can awaken. Even now they visit us in great luminous hours. So science measures the external world. It doesn't have any other data. Or in thought's broad impalpable exchange, a speculator in tenuous vast ideas. So there is the other kind, which is philosophy, where people think and have exchange of ideas. Could it be, could it not be? Logic and reason. At the end, an inconclusive play is reason's toil. Sri Aurobindo would tell us in Savitri, when he describes the kingdoms of the little mind, an inconclusive play is reason's toil. At the end, we are left with agnosticism. This is the highest word of reason. It cannot tell us with certitude. So sometimes it's absurd when somebody says, but science says like this. Science cannot see beyond the tip of our nose, actually. Its limit is our sight. But the limits of our sight are not the limits of light. So here Sri Aurobindo tells us, a speculator in tenuous vast ideas, God is or God is not. Abstractions in the void, her currency. There are people who discuss and debate and hold a seminar, whether actually there is divine or not. At the end you ask, have you, by the way sir, have you experienced the divine? Oh no, don't talk of all these things. What is the currency? In the void. But very nice lectures. So here Sri Aurobindo is telling us, a speculator in tenuous vast ideas, abstractions in the void, her currency. We know not with what firm values for its base. And in this state of affairs, there is only one little light that shines. Only religion in this bankruptcy presents its dubious riches to our hearts. The good thing of religion is at least it accepts there is a beyond. At least it shows us some possibility that there is beyond our limited sight and hearing something that is there towards which we can aspire, from whom we can draw support and sustenance. And yet it's a bankrupt state in which we live. Wall Street has collapsed much later. We are already bankrupt. So Sri Aurobindo is reminding us that in this bankruptcy, the only thing, religion presents its dubious riches to our hearts. How? Evangelism. It will come and tell us, look sir, if you have faith in this particular God, we can assure you that you will be given a birth in heaven after death. Have you seen heaven? No sir, after death we will see. Have you seen God? No sir, that how can you say God we cannot see? We are mortals. You have to believe it. If you believe, that's enough. So Sri Aurobindo is describing us with this touch of humor. Only religion in this bankruptcy presents its dubious riches to our hearts. You have to take it or leave it simply by belief. Or science on provision checks on the beyond. You are initiated, assured in 3 lives, you will get mukti. After that, I have to do nothing. Most people take it as wonderful complacency. Most cults end up like this. The moment you join a cult, people believe, wow, now I am assured. So, unprovisioned check. They don't realize it's an unprovisioned check. It must have 2 signatures. In all checks for, big companies, you need, I am not an expert in finances, but I suppose you need 2 checks. One is the signature, the other is the boss must countersign. So, this signature is only a provisional signature. Unless the boss countersigns, this is not sufficient. So, the priest or this thing is only the first signatory. Only an unprovisioned check. Finally, it must be signed there that you have deserved it, you are worthy of it. So, religion signs unprovisioned checks to the beyond. If we go to the gates, then they will see only one signature, no seal. So, like our government offices, they will return us back. They will make us run 10 times that, please get this signature, that affidavit, go to this department. So, we have to have effort. There is no shortcut to that. Our poverty or signs unprovisioned checks on the beyond, our poverty shall there have its revenge. We are told, don't worry, if you suffer here, in heaven you will enjoy. In heaven you will be given a big place near God. If you have, been initiated as a kid, then when you go in the heaven, you will get a place very near Him. It doesn't matter what you have done all your life. It is enough if you have the name or surname which belongs to this religion. So, Sri Aurobindo is telling us with this touch of humor which is abundant in Savitri, our poverty shall there have its revenge. Our spirits depart, discarding a futile life, into the blank unknown, or with them take death's passport into immortality. No visa. So we carry the passport and we go to the gates. We have come from earth, we have left our fallen state, and I belong to this religion. Okay, where is the visa? Oh, you need this also. Where is the currency? Sir, unprovisioned check, please go back. So death's passport into immortality. We will close with these last 2 lines, which is a new movement, but it gives us the true hope. In spite of seeing all this, Sri Aurobindo sees beyond. That is the beauty of Sri Aurobindo. People think that Sri Aurobindo didn't know what we are, human beings. Someone asked this of Sri Aurobindo, but Sri Aurobindo says, after seeing all this in much greater detail than we know of human life, yet was this only a provisional scheme, a false appearance sketched by limiting sense. Even this is a provisional scheme. And what is that real scheme? We shall come back after a break. Thank you.